The following is an interview with the leader of the Galactic Empire, Grand Admiral Thrawn, shot in the 9th year after the Battle of Yavin. This was shot aboard the Grand Admiral's Imperial Star Destroyer, which is, of course, the Chimera. The interview, which you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the Galactic Civil War, how it started, what's happening, and most presently, how it might end. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat from the burgeoning New Republic, and that's your justification? And the answer we got shocked us. Thrawn went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of the Empire going back to the days of the Old Republic, and honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and interrupted him several times, and he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview, and we ended it long before the Imperial interdictor cruisers activated their gravity well projectors to trap the New Republic fleet. Instead, what you're about to see seems sincere to us, whether you agree with it or not. Thrawn believes that he is the rightful heir to an empire that should rise once more as the dominant force in the galaxy. So our opinion would be to view it in that light, as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Grand Admiral Thrawn, thank you for your time. In the 5th year following the death of Emperor Palpatine during the Battle of Endor, you launched a devastating siege on Coruscant, crippling the entire system with the deployment of a hazard field of cloaked asteroids carried out by the Death's Head and other Star Destroyers at your command. Of course, this was just the latest in a series of successful military strikes against the New Republic that started in the Outer Rim territories. After effectively overstretching the already threadbare forces of the former rebellion and bolstering your own forces with the dreadnoughts of the Katana fleet, only a fraction of the New Republic forces, Rogue Squadron, and the paltry Smugglers Alliance stand between you and complete conquest of the galaxy. To many, this would seem to be the fulfillment of your promise at the outset of this campaign to bring about the complete, total, and utter destruction of the rebellion. And yet, Imperial records show you to have gained considerable rank in the Chiss Ascendancy before you were exiled. They also reveal you to have had several conflicts with both Imperial and Rebel forces before your current position. Why do you now believe that the Empire should be the ruling power in the galaxy with you as its leader? How did you conclude that?
It is not simply a matter of power. It is that multiple species, with multiple viewpoints and philosophies, simply cannot hold power together for long. The dominant voice must certainly be wise enough to adopt ideas and methods from its allies and member peoples. But there must be a dominant voice, or there is only chaos. This has been the history of the Republic. The Empire is merely the correction to this error, and I've never said anything otherwise. Are we having a holodrama, or a serious conversation?
Ha! Well, the quote, and it is formidably serious, is that...
I understand you were trained in history at the Imperial Academy on Rythal?
Yes, I was.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute of your time to give you a brief historical background.
Please.
Let us look at the history of the previous ruling body of the galaxy. Where does the Republic come from? It was not born out of peace, but out of necessity. 25,053 years before the Battle of Yavin, that is BBY, during the Unification Wars, the Galactic Constitution was ratified. This document, though idealistic in language, was a response to escalating fragmentation across the core worlds. The initial Republic was formed as a stabilizing framework, rather than a vision of unity. Humans and Duros, during this period, reverse-engineered hyperdrive technology from remnants of the Infinite Empire, a far older civilization that wielded the Force in more utilitarian forms. With this innovation, the galaxy changed. Suddenly, travel was not bound to sublight velocities or theoretical relay chains. Coruscant became a natural nexus, and within 53 years, it was the Republic's capital, a status it would retain for 25 millennia.
So the Republic wasn't just an idea, it was an infrastructure project, one built on scavenged knowledge and pragmatic necessity.
Precisely. The early Republic did not seek rapid expansion. In fact, its founders, primarily humans from the core, preferred stability. That preference, however, was soon tested. There was, interestingly, a clandestine element at play, the Geno Haradan, a covert bounty hunter guild. Little known even now, they acted as silent guardians and secret police for the Republic's political class. Their existence was kept hidden, even from the Jedi Order. One must ask, why create an invisible hand if you trust your visible institutions?
You're saying the Republic needed protection from within, even before it faced threats from without?
Correct. The founders understood that idealism is fragile. It requires protection until it becomes self-sustaining, if it ever does. The Geno Haradan provided that shield, an early sign, I would argue, of the Republic's fundamental tension, public virtue paired with covert control.
That's fascinating. And what about the Jedi? At what point did they enter the picture?
Shortly after the Perlemian trade route was charted, linking Coruscant to Ossus. That corridor brought with it not just commerce, but entirely new cultures. The Jedi Knights entered the Republic through that same gateway. Their presence offered spiritual legitimacy and martial capability. However, it also initiated a dependency. Over time, the Republic would rely increasingly on the Jedi not merely as peacekeepers, but as instruments of policy.
That dependency, you're saying it created a blind spot?
It created several, but more on that later. Initially, the Jedi were respected allies, not enforcers. Their code emphasized detachment and service. It worked for a time, but philosophy rarely survives contact with politics. The more the Republic expanded, particularly along the Perlemian and the Corellian Run, the more it absorbed worlds not just diplomatically, but economically. Muunilinst, for instance, became the financial engine of the Republic, birthing the intergalactic banking clan. These were not neutral institutions. They were power centers in their own right.
So even in the so-called Golden Age, you're describing something that was expanding faster than it could regulate. A kind of slow-motion entropy?
Well said, Tucker. The Republic's expansion, away from the hyperlane anomalies beyond Coruscant, created a wedge, the slice. Within it, systems rushed to join, seeking protection from larger threats like the Hutt Empire, which at the time was collapsing into internal division. The irony is that even as the Republic grew, it resisted its own growth. Official doctrine favored measured inclusion, but popular pressure and external threats accelerated the timeline. By 25,000 BBY, Coruscant had become a galactic hub in both name and function.
Let me ask you something that's often glossed over. How peaceful was this early Republic really?
It wasn't. Stable, at best, would be a better descriptor. Its record includes conflicts such as the 100-Year Darkness, the Volta Cataclysm, and the Old Sith Wars. There were the Mandalorian incursions, the Jedi Civil War, and much later, the Clone Wars. These were not aberrations. They were expressions of systemic strain. The Jedi, along with Republic fleets, bore the burden of these conflicts. But the pattern is clear. Every few centuries, crisis returned. The first Great Schism, for example, dissident Jedi like Zendor challenged the orthodoxy, not for power, but for philosophical divergence. They believed that emotion, not suppression, was the path to mastery. The Republic responded with force.
So we have an expanding bureaucracy, a centralized Jedi order, and repeated uprisings, many of which came from within. Doesn't that sound like a warning signal?
It is a familiar pattern to anyone who studies history dispassionately. Institutions, when overextended, resort to rigidity. The Republic endured, but it did not adapt. Instead, it relied on tradition and inertia. That brings us to the Taiwanese War, around 24,000 BBY. A conflict sparked by competition for control over the Perlemian. with tensions exchanged between capitals, Coruscant and Deceivro. The Republic eventually prevailed by weaponizing Hutt interests against the Taiwanese, a clever, if morally ambiguous strategy. Most of the Tion cluster joined the Republic soon after, though Deceivro remained proudly independent.
So even then, the Republic won by proxy and manipulation, not open conquest. Is that a strength or a weakness?
That depends on whether you view survival as an end or a means. The Republic survived, but at each turn, it layered new compromises atop its core ideals. Each crisis created precedent, and precedent, Tucker, is the soil from which future decline takes root.
Let's talk about that survival for a moment. You said earlier that the Republic was, in essence, an institution born from perpetual expansion. So, when the Republic started pushing its way across the galaxy during the Great Manifest period, reaching past the borders of the slice into unknown space, how did the real foundation of the Republic fare, especially with the tensions brewing between core worlds and the Rim? Seems like there was a lot of disorganization happening beneath the surface.
Expansion is the natural result of growth, Tucker. The Republic had to push outward, establishing outposts like Ord Mantell and Malastare, though it was far from a smooth process. The deeper the Republic ventured into the unknown, the more it encountered challenges, as most of the galaxy was unexplored. But every frontier, every unknown, was a chance to refine and solidify control. It was during this period that the real test of the Republic's strength began to emerge. Internal conflicts, especially from the Alsakan.
And these Alsakan conflicts, you're telling me, were a major source of instability for the Republic's expansion, right? 17 conflicts spread out over nearly 15,000 years. Sounds like a pretty chaotic way of handling things. So why didn't the Republic just eliminate them early on?
Because the Alsakan struggles were more than mere skirmishes. They were rooted in philosophical divides, core versus periphery, centralized control versus regional autonomy. Coruscant, representing unity, faced opposition from Alsakan, which sought to wrest control from the capital. In each conflict, Coruscant won, but the wounds were deep. By the time the seventh conflict ended, the damage was more than strategic. It was cultural, and this strain would shape the trajectory of the Republic for millennia.
Sounds like you're painting a picture of the Republic as some sort of ticking detonator charge with all this back and forth. But you've also got the rise of the Pius Dea cult around 12,000 BBY, right? These theocratic fanatics ruled the Republic for 1,000 years. How does that square with your vision of a unified order? Wouldn't that have made things even worse?
The rise of the Pius Dea cult was a moment of significant transformation for the Republic, but it was not the Republic's defining characteristic. The cult's crusades against alien sects were misguided, to put it mildly. Yet they were a product of the times that demanded a form of leadership that could hold the fracturing Republic together. But the tension between core and rim worlds would continue to grow, fueled by these violent crusades.
And this turmoil would only continue when yet another great schism would wreak havoc on the Jedi Order. Can you speak to the 100-year darkness? The Jedi falling, creating horrific creatures who siphon life energy using the Force. If the Jedi are so noble, how did they let this happen?
The 100-year darkness was a tumultuous chapter. Indeed, the Jedi, in their pursuit of power and knowledge, allowed themselves to be corrupted. The creation of the Leviathans, monstrous entities that consumed life, was a result of their failure to understand the consequences of their unbridled experiments in the Force. It was a conflict that marked the turning point in Jedi history, where their pursuit of knowledge became their undoing. The Jedi Order, for all its virtue, had its blind spots, just as any institution does.
So let me get this straight. The Jedi create the Leviathans. The Sith emerge from their failure. And you're telling me this is just another example of how even the most noble institutions, when unchecked, can spiral into disaster.
It is inevitable. Every institution is at risk of becoming something else when faced with absolute power. The Jedi were no exception to this rule. They failed to recognize their own vulnerabilities, and when that happens, Tucker, the consequences are often catastrophic.
Now, we've got a lot to unpack here, and that's without even mentioning the Great Hyperspace War in 5000 BBY. The Jedi managed to hold off the Sith, but could not destroy them. That seems like a major missed opportunity, doesn't it? If the Jedi had managed to wipe out the Sith right then, wouldn't the galaxy have been a lot better off?
It is easy to say with hindsight that the Jedi should have eradicated the Sith, but such an action would have been short-sighted. The Sith are not easily destroyed, Tucker. The Jedi understood this. They repelled the invasion but allowed the Sith to live. This was not out of mercy, but of pragmatism. The Sith would always find a way to return. The important task was to prevent their immediate threat, not to risk fueling an even greater resurgence through martyrdom.
Right, but then we come to the Third Great Schism in 4250 BBY, a huge internal fight on Coruscant, resulting in these Dark Jedi fleeing to the Vulture system, finding ancient celestial technology, and then essentially destroying everything around them. A band of rogue Jedi with immense technology that just decides to destroy a whole system. That sounds like anarchy.
It is precisely the type of chaos one would expect when the boundaries of knowledge and power are pushed too far. The Dark Jedi, once cast out, sought to harness power that was beyond their understanding. But the technological marvels of the Celestials were not meant for mortal hands. Even their manipulations through the Force could not control them, and their arrogance led to their undoing. The Vultar Cataclysm was the result of such reckless ambition.
Then around 4000 BBY, we get the Old Sith Wars, the Great Sith War, with warlords like Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma wreaking havoc on the galaxy. What did the Jedi think they were doing, letting such dissidents rise to power?
The rise of Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma mark continued failures in the Jedi Order's oversight. The Jedi, for all their supposed wisdom, consistently underestimate the dark side's corruptive allure. It took the devastation of the Great Sith War to bring about the necessary unity of Jedi and Republic forces to stop them. But even then, the aftermath was not a clear victory. The Sith, defeated in battle, retreated into the shadows, only to return in another form.
Grand Admiral, are you referring to the Jedi Civil War with Revan and Malak, a full-on galactic disaster, planets like Taris, Dantooine, Telos, just leveled by the Sith? You've got to wonder, shouldn't the Jedi have seen this coming?
The Jedi Civil War was, indeed, one of the most destructive conflicts of that era. But it was a war not only against the Sith, but also within the Jedi themselves. Revan's fall to the dark side was not that familiar cautionary tale. His was a keen mind, remarkably resistant to the typical hubris and the temptation of ultimate power, even when he ruled over a Sith armada. The Jedi, blinded by their belief in their own righteousness, failed to foresee the rise of such a powerful figure within their own ranks, because they did not fully understand the power that Revan possessed. Malak, on the other hand, exemplified the tyrannical brutality of many a fallen Jedi. And, in the aftermath, the galaxy was left in ruins, and the Sith remnants fought among themselves, further destabilizing the Republic.
And here we go again, the Sith ever present, fighting amongst themselves, even after the Jedi Civil War. It sounds like a repeating pattern of war and destruction, where the Republic is barely holding together.
That is the unfortunate nature of such a galaxy under the Republic, Tucker. Where one threat fades, another takes its place, and scars accumulate in the endless cycle of conflict.
So what remains from this fighting? We get Queen Elsinore Dantazia sponsoring an expansion fleet that discovered Naboo in 3900 BBY. We've gone from galactic war to exploration again without considering the notion that war will inevitably follow.
It is the nature of history to repeat itself. But in the discovery of Naboo and in the pioneering of new hyperspace routes like the Hydian Way, there was potential for the Republic to evolve into new worlds, new opportunities. However, as we have seen time and again, this hope is always tempered by the realities of the galaxy's complex political and military landscape.
And let's not forget the Khan's disorders, with Muriel of Argazda seceding from the Republic, establishing a brutal military regime and enslaving entire populations. The Lordians had to invent a whole new form of communication to survive. Of course, after centuries of suffering, the Jedi finally intervened, but the situation was already well out of control.
The Khan's disorders were yet another example of the Republic's inability to maintain order in the face of local ambition and cruelty. The suffering of the Lordians was a tragedy, yes. However, their ultimate resolution, with the fall of Muriel's regime, was a testament to the persistence of the Jedi and the Republic's capacity to eventually right what its people believed to be wrongs. The galaxy is never without conflict, but it is also never without hope. Although hope cannot sustain a galactic rule, it is critical to understand the successes of those whose viewpoints are in ideological opposition to your own.
You mentioned the discovery of the Hydian Way in 3700 BBY, allowing the Republic to push into the mid and outer rims. There was certainly hope in a new wave of expansion. But then again, how much longer can this go on before the next massive conflict? History has proven it hard to see an end to all of this.
That, Tucker, is the nature of the galaxy. Always expanding, always evolving. The Hydian Way allowed the Republic to open up new frontiers, and with them, new challenges. But it is through expansion, through pushing the boundaries, that the Republic, and indeed, the galaxy itself, remains dynamic. The cycle will continue, but it is the question of how one handles it that defines the outcome.
So let's talk about how the Jedi would handle the outcomes of their battles. As we all know, the Sith Empire returned and the Great Galactic War kicked off, leaving the Republic in shambles. After heavy losses, the Republic signs the Treaty of Coruscant in 3653 BBY. And then what do we get? A massive economic depression, the widespread loss of allies, and the Republic crumbling apart.
It was indeed a catastrophic time for the Republic. The Treaty of Coruscant was not simply a diplomatic agreement. It was a sign of the Republic's weakened state, a testament to the toll the war had taken. The Sith Empire gained significant ground, and the Republic was forced to make concessions it could barely afford. And the economic depression that followed certainly worsened the situation. With many star systems pulling away, it was clear that the Republic's future was in jeopardy.
And then after all of that, the Senate turns against the Jedi. The Order is forced to leave Coruscant and relocate to Tython. Is this finally a realization of the failure on the part of the Jedi and their charge in keeping galactic peace? Or was that just a convenient scapegoat for the Senate?
The Senate, in its desperation, needed to find a target for its failures. The Jedi were the obvious choice, an order that was both revered and misunderstood. In times of crisis, it is all too easy to turn on those who are seen as untouchable. The Jedi were, in a sense, victims of their own status. The reality was more complex, of course, but this was a political decision driven by the need to maintain power and shift blame.
And then we get the Cold War lasting for 11 years after the Treaty of Coruscant. The galaxy is in the standoff, just waiting for fighting to erupt. Eventually things do get worse, culminating in the Galactic War, and then, astonishingly, the Revanites return with Revan himself leading them. What happened there? Was the galaxy ever going to see peace?
Peace was never a true possibility during those years, and anyone with a basic understanding of the history, art, and philosophy of disgraced Jedi could foresee the Galactic War. It wasn't just the Sith Empire or the Republic at odds. It was the culmination of centuries of ideological and political conflict. The return of the Revanites signaled the continuation of this war, with Revan's influence acting as a catalyst. The war may have concluded temporarily with a truce, but it was clear that both sides were waiting for the right moment to strike again. Peace, as ever in the galaxy, is always fragile.
And then right after that temporary truce, the Eternal Empire arrived, led by the Outlander and their Eternal Alliance, forcing both the Sith Empire and the Republic to submit to this new power. Did the galaxy lose all its autonomy?
The conflict on Iokath and the assault on Ossus were merely symptoms of a larger issue: the inability of the Sith and the Jedi to coexist. The galaxy is built on this fundamental tension between light and dark, order and chaos. As long as these opposing forces exist, peace will always be temporary, fragile at best. A respite is possible, but it will not last, not in a galaxy defined by such deep-rooted conflict.
I suppose so. But I want to move on into 3000 BBY and the 17th Alsakan conflict. The Republic defeats Alsakan and introduces the Invincible-class dreadnought. Finally, a victory, but it's not enough to keep the Sith at bay, is it?
The 17th Alsakan conflict was indeed a victory for the Republic, but it was a fleeting one. The Invincible-class dreadnought was an attempt to secure the Republic's military dominance. However, even with such advancements, the Republic could never fully rid itself of the Sith threat. The galaxy had already entered an era where the balance of power was constantly shifting, and no single victory could tip the scales permanently.
Then we get to 2000 BBY when the Sith are back once again. Darth Ruin falls and the new Sith Empire rises. The Jedi are on the front lines this time, taking charge of the war against them. But doesn't this just feel like the same old story repeating itself?
It is, in many ways, the same story. The rise of the new Sith Empire and the Jedi's direct involvement was inevitable. The Sith had laid their foundations long before their rebirth. The Jedi, too, knew that they would eventually have to take the lead against them. But this time, there was a difference. The Jedi were not only fighting for the Republic, but for their very survival. The war was not just political. It was existential.
And then we get to the Battle of Mitth'raw'nuruodo in 1466 BBY. The Republic takes a massive loss and plunges into a dark age that follows, right? How do you come back from something like that? The Republic shrinks, the Jedi take control, and the Senate is bypassed. It's an enormous shift in power.
Indeed, the Republic's loss was so devastating that it could not recover in its previous form. The Jedi, in their desperation, took absolute control, sidelining the Senate. It was a time of dark reflection, where the Republic became a shadow of itself. The Jedi were forced into positions of leadership that they had never intended to hold and were ill-equipped for, and the galaxy was forced to adapt to a new order where the Jedi Army of Light wielded the ultimate power.
Next is the Ruusan Reformation. The Senate is restored. The Jedi are placed under the Republic's authority, and the military is disbanded. It's almost like a new era of peace. Does it last?
The Ruusan Reformation was an attempt to bring order to a galaxy that had been torn apart by centuries of conflict. The disbanding of the military was symbolic, an effort to show that the Republic sought peace, not war. But such measures often come with their own risks.
Right, as after all this, the Republic becomes contented. They scale down their armies, trust more in the Jedi, and let the outer systems fend for themselves.
Complacency, Tucker, is the greatest danger of all. When a society feels secure, it often neglects the very threats that once defined it. The outer systems were left to their own devices, and the galaxy's focus turned inward. It was only a matter of time before the next threat emerged.
And that's exactly what happened. Fast forward to 32 BBY, Palpatine emerges as a rising force. At this point, he's more than just a politician, effectively controlling the Senate outright. He positions himself as a champion of the Republic, but his designs, they were purely for his own benefit?
Exactly. Palpatine had been operating in the shadows for years, understanding the intricacies of the Senate and the failings of its leadership. The Republic, weakened by inefficiency and bureaucracy, was ripe for exploitation. When Naboo was invaded, the stagnation had become so overwhelming that the Senate was rendered powerless, and Palpatine seized the opportunity. He didn't just rescue the Republic, he took control of it. He understood the fragility of the system and used it to his advantage.
But it wasn't just that he took control. He got rid of the existing leadership. I mean, there was a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. They replaced him with Palpatine, who effortlessly assumed the new role of Supreme Chancellor. How did this happen?
Palpatine's move was a masterstroke. By manipulating Senator Amidala to push for that very vote, he quietly framed himself as the solution to the Republic's paralysis. Valorum's inability to act, particularly in the face of the Trade Federation's invasion, created the perfect opening. Palpatine, with his calculated rhetoric, convinced the Senate that he was the only one capable of leading the Republic in its time of crisis. In doing so, he quickly shifted from a mere politician to a central, indispensable figure.
And then he does something that seems almost unthinkable. He stays in power. Normally, the Chancellor has a 2-term limit, but Palpatine held office well past that. How did he pull that off?
Palpatine's longevity in office was a testament to his understanding of the Republic's need for stability. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and as tensions escalated, the Senate became more and more reliant on Palpatine's leadership. The Senate granted him emergency powers to deal with the separatist crisis, and when those powers were extended, Palpatine quickly began to erode the limits placed on his authority. The Senate was so desperate for someone who could keep the Republic intact that they willingly handed him more control, making a temporary measure permanent.
So he uses the war to justify his power, and I'm guessing the war itself, the separatist crisis, was the perfect cover for him to consolidate power, right?
Indeed. It provided Palpatine with the perfect pretext that allowed him to sidestep traditional governance and amass control under the guise of galactic security.
Now, the Republic no longer had a standing military at this point, so where did the clone army come into play?
The creation of the clone army was a calculated response to the Republic's military vulnerabilities. The Jedi had long been peacekeepers, not soldiers. The Republic, facing an enemy with an army of droids, had no choice but to assemble a formal military to match the separatists. The clones were the perfect solution. Genetically engineered soldiers bred for obedience and efficiency. Palpatine made sure that their creation was framed as a necessary response to the separatist threat, but in reality, it was part of his broader strategy to strengthen his grip on the Republic.
And let's not forget, Palpatine's alliances here are key. You've got the Hutts, Jabba's criminal empire, siding with the Republic. That's some powerful backing, but it wasn't just for the Republic's benefit, was it?
No. Palpatine's alliance with the Hutts was a pragmatic one. The Hutts controlled essential hyperspace lanes, and their backing provided the Republic with crucial logistical support. In exchange for their cooperation, Palpatine gave the Hutts a certain amount of autonomy, allowing them to conduct business freely within their territories. It was a mutually beneficial relationship, one that strengthened Palpatine's position by depriving the Separatists of valuable allies and resources.
And through all of this, Palpatine's influence over the Senate grows stronger. By the time the war is in full swing, he's essentially in charge of everything. The Senate's loyalty to him is unquestioned.
That's correct. The Senate, ever more desperate, put its full trust in Palpatine. The war allowed him to present himself as the Republic's protector, the man who could save the galaxy from the droid armies and their ruthless general, Grievous. And by the end of the war, he had not only secured victory against the Separatists, but had also transformed the Republic into a system where his authority was unquestioned.
So in the end, Palpatine didn't just manipulate the war, he used it to remake the Republic in his own image?
Precisely. The war, the clone army, the clandestine alliances, all of it was part of Palpatine's broader strategy. The war he was truly waging was the creation of a new order, one where he held the power to shape the galaxy's future. And in doing so, he solidified his position as not just the leader of the Republic, but the master of it.
So you've got the Republic slipping into autocracy, and the Jedi, who were supposed to be the peacekeepers, finally uncovering Palpatine's true intentions. But by then, there was nothing they could do.
It's almost tragic, isn't it? The Jedi, bound by their duty to the Republic and the Senate, realized too late that Palpatine's intentions were not in line with their values. His hunger for power was evident, and yet the Senate, blinded by their loyalty, had no interest in stopping him. When the Jedi, with the help of Anakin Skywalker, finally uncovered that Palpatine was Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, they mistakenly believed they could stop him through Force alone. Palpatine turned the tables on the Jedi in spectacular fashion. After killing Mace Windu, a Jedi Master who had long harbored suspicions against him, he twisted the public narrative, portraying the Jedi as traitors and assassins trying to overthrow the Republic. He then enacted Order 66, which was the final blow to the Jedi Order. It was a brilliant manipulation, one that exploited both the Senate's fear and its willingness to follow his lead. The remaining Jedi were hunted down and defeated.
And just like that, the Jedi are destroyed. The Clone Wars end and the Republic is reorganized into the first Galactic Empire that we have come to know today.
It was so much more than that. The irony was the Senate, so quick to grant him power in the name of security, now cheered as the Republic was replaced by a dictatorship. The very Senate that had been corrupted and manipulated by Palpatine was complicit in its own destruction.
So in one swift motion, the Republic is gone, the Empire is born, and the Senate's reduced to nothing more than a figurehead. Is it fair to say that Palpatine was attempting to rewrite the history of the galaxy?
That's the most remarkable part. Palpatine's purge wasn't just political, it was cultural. By disbanding the Senate, nationalizing industries, and centralizing all power in the hands of himself as emperor, he effectively erased any trace of the old Republic. The institutions that had once symbolized democracy were replaced with the symbols of imperial power. Of course, even as the Republic died, there were those who still clung to its ideals, quietly disillusioned with the Empire's brutal grip. In 2 BBY, those who were dissatisfied with Palpatine's empire began to organize. The creation of the Rebel Alliance was the first spark of resistance against the Empire's tyranny. It was a movement born out of desperation, but it would prove to be the beginning of a new chapter. The Alliance represented everything the Empire sought to crush: stagnation and endless wars of the old Republic. And thus, the Galactic Civil War you know so well began.
Now hold on, Grand Admiral. I'm sure you're not inventing it, but I don't know what this grand timeline has to do with your siege at Coruscant and current designs for the Empire. And I'm not entirely sure just how you have such insight into the former Emperor's actions.
I assure you, it is more than relevant. This briefing is coming to an end, but one must appreciate the events that unfolded to understand our current situation. And with respect to Palpatine, I do not derive everything I know merely from Imperial records. Before even the advent of the Clone Wars, I had a part to play. You see, I was a young commander of a picket force in the Chiss expansionary fleet, in what you would describe as the unknown regions of the galaxy. My journey truly began with the Vagari threat, which I had to neutralize swiftly to protect the Chiss ascendancy. That is to say, the empire of my people. At the time, my immediate goal was to dismantle the Vagari and secure strategic advantages. But it soon became clear that I had a larger role to play in the events that would unfold. The outbound flight, an ambitious exploratory project of the Jedi, entered the picture as a potential catalyst for disaster. The Jedi, led by Joruus C'baoth, refused to consider my warnings about the far outsiders, a looming threat far beyond the galaxy. One I still must confront, but I will address this later. Returning to the Vagari and my confrontation with the Jedi, the political landscape around me began to shift. My people were caught in their own web of internal politics. My actions, particularly my decision to act decisively against the Vagari without full authorization, brought me under scrutiny. Despite my successes, including the destruction of the Vagari fleet and the rescue of thousands of slaves aboard their ships, I knew I had to make careful moves to retain my position.
So just to clarify, you found yourself facing internal politics within the Chiss while trying to balance the immediate threats with your long-term goals. Is this where the Emperor first approached you?
Very good, Tucker. You see, I had already navigated several political minefields within the Chiss Ascendancy when Palpatine offered me a position in his service. His vision of galactic domination aligned with my own strategic goals: resources, power, and an expansive reach. His vast control over the galaxy's military assets could give me the tools I needed to confront emerging threats, including the far outsiders. But the reality was that I had already sacrificed much for the Chiss. They were my people, and their defense was my foremost duty. To abandon them to the chaos of outbound flight was something I could not accept. The Chiss Ascendancy, despite its flaws, had my loyalty. It was a complex decision. Though Palpatine's proposal was tempting, I could not abandon my principles or my people.
So despite the allure of the Emperor's offer, you turned him down, but you weren't exactly sitting idly by within the Chiss, were you?
Indeed. After declining Palpatine's offer, I knew that staying within the constraints of Chiss doctrine would be limiting. The galaxy's larger threats, particularly the far outsiders, required a more flexible approach. I was aware of the internal scrutiny I faced, but my long-term vision had to take precedence. The Chiss, bound by their traditions and hierarchies, were not always in a position to act decisively against these external dangers. I needed to take action, even if it meant pushing boundaries with the ruling families. I was prepared for exile if it came to that.
If I had to venture a guess, I'd say that it did.
With a vengeance. My preemptive strike against a ground installation in the unknown regions to prevent their stockpiling weapons was the final blow in a series of actions perceived as anathema to the Ascendancy. I knew that I would be cast out and stripped of rank, but it was a necessary step. In some ways, I welcomed it.
So I've read that you were eventually abandoned on a distant backwater planet. You say you welcome this, but did you ever feel like it was over for you?
There were times when I questioned whether I would ever return to the Chiss, to the galaxy. Life on that planet was harsh, and survival was difficult. Yet I refused to surrender to despair. I built what I needed, adapted to my environment, and continued to observe the galaxy's movements. My exile was not an end, but a recalibration. I knew that I could not afford to ignore the growing threats, especially the far outsiders. This consumed all my thoughts until my inevitable escape.
Well then, let's talk about your escape. In 19 BBY, shortly after Palpatine's nullification of the Republic, you received an unexpected opportunity when the Empire arrived at your place of exile. You immediately began carrying out an elaborate series of ambushes against Imperial forces. Why take the risk?
Because the risk was necessary. The arrival of the Star Destroyer, Strikefast, presented the first real opportunity in years to re-enter galactic affairs. The Empire's forces, though formidable, were arrogant. They underestimated both the environment and any potential local resistance. I used that arrogance against them, recovering comlinks from crashed TIE fighters, setting traps using local fauna to trigger chaos and confusion. The goal wasn't direct confrontation, it was misdirection.
So you weren't just trying to escape, you were playing them, creating the illusion that some primitive natives were attacking their camp, all while staying steps ahead of their own officers.
Precisely. I needed them off balance. I provoked escalating responses, from light patrols to full stormtrooper deployment, so I could eventually infiltrate their ranks. By disabling one trooper and donning his armor, I walked directly into their camp. Their own tactics and blindness to unfamiliar threats worked in my favor.
But then Park, the strike-fast commander, ultimately saw through your ruses and managed to capture you. I'm guessing that wasn't part of the plan.
It was an unfortunate turn. I had hoped to complete my escape before they realized I had infiltrated them. But when it became clear I had been discovered, surrender became the logical next step. Resistance would have been suicidal and counterproductive. I needed to survive, to pivot my strategy.
But Park saw your potential and brought you on board his Star Destroyer, bound for the heart of the Empire. How would you describe this turn? Did this seem like the end?
On the contrary, I had long understood that if I were ever to leave isolation, it would be through the Empire. Their arrival simply confirmed that Palpatine had achieved the vast reach, resources, and ambition that so aligned with my own need to counter emerging threats in the unknown regions. Boarding the Strikefast was not just an escape. It was a step into a larger game. I joined the Empire, overcoming not inconsiderable prejudice against alien officers over the years, and established a network of bases, garrisons, and outposts in the unknown regions, all in service to my larger design of using Imperial resources to chart, secure, and ultimately tame those wild frontiers.
So all of it, the exile, the return, the rise through the Imperial ranks, it was all in service of a bigger mission. You were laying the groundwork for Imperial expansion beyond known space?
Correct. Some worlds were brought in through diplomacy, others through force. And while I did resort to harsh measures, such as the UR-41 strike or the destruction of resistant worlds, they were always strategic. The purpose was stability, control, preparation.
And the species you encountered, you didn't just conquer them, you studied them, sometimes even integrated them into the Empire?
Always. Understanding culture is key to military success. Every species presented a new challenge, a new set of values, vulnerabilities, and strengths. I tailored my approach accordingly. Negotiations when possible, calculated force when necessary.
But in the end, even after everything you built, I suspect it wasn't enough. Why is that?
Because the unknown regions are vast and full of shadows even I couldn't fully map. The threats I foresaw are still out there. What I accomplished laid the foundation, but the real work of safeguarding the galaxy has only just begun, and the Empire provides the means. My loyalty has always been to order, to survival, and to the preservation of civilization. It is not self-adulation when I say that I have the clearest vision of the future. It is a cold truth that the unknown regions are the future, and the galaxy is far from safe.
Grand Admiral, I have to interrupt you there. You talk of means, vast reach, resources that the Empire has, but much of this has been lost since the Battle of Endor. Upstart rebellion propaganda in the form of the New Republic decreed that the Empire's in shambles, barely a quarter of its former strength, with most of its major leaders either dead or hiding. And then you came back to known space, like a ghost rising from the ashes. Why? What was it that made you return at that exact moment?
The situation was dire, yes, but it was also an opportunity. The Empire had fractured, but this new republic, despite its public facade, was no better. Its inefficiency, its bureaucracy, it was all too familiar. In many ways, I saw the same mistakes that led to the downfall of the old Republic being repeated. When I returned, it was not just to restore the Empire, but to safeguard the galaxy against itself, as well as the true threats that were gathering on the horizon.
So it wasn't just about picking up the pieces for you, it was about seeing something bigger coming, a common theme with your vision since your time in the Ascendancy.
Yes, the signs were already there. The instability of the galaxy, the corruption of the New Republic. It made it an easy target for any force that understood how to exploit it. I knew I could not be alone in recognizing that this system would crumble under the weight of that threat. I believed the only chance for survival lay in rebuilding the Empire into a properly militarized, efficient force. I knew it was a hard path, but one I was willing to walk.
So you're saying you attacked the New Republic not just because they were the immediate threat, but because you knew they couldn't handle what was coming? You were already thinking ahead while everyone else was stuck fighting among themselves?
Precisely. The New Republic was fragile, and even if I offered my services to them, they would have never been able to marshal the strength necessary to face the far outsiders. It wasn't just a matter of defeating them. It was about ensuring the survival of the galaxy and the Empire's legacy. I attacked because it was the only way to preserve what remained of order and structure in a galaxy descending into chaos.
Let me pause there. This is fascinating. You've got a galaxy on the brink of collapse. You've got the New Republic stretched thin, and here you are reuniting the Empire. You come back, board the Star Destroyer Chimera, and essentially take command. And I see that the first thing you do is refit the commander's luxury suite into a private command room. Why is that? A little bit of personal space, or is there more to it?
It was a symbolic act, yes, but also a practical one. The luxury suite, which was once a place for relaxation and decadence, was transformed into a space where strategic decisions could be made in solitude and focus. The Empire needed a sharp, clear vision, not the distractions of its past excesses. I chose to meditate there because it offered the stillness I needed to plan the future of the Empire. A restructured empire, not built on Palpatine's indulgences, but on purpose.
I understand. There's a certain poetry in that, really. Taking something that symbolized the old regime and turning it into a place of focus for rebuilding. So at this point, you're back, you've assumed command, and you're ready to enact your goals. But what was it like dealing with the remnants of the Empire? It wasn't a smooth transition. You had to unite a fractured and demoralized group of leaders and officers, didn't you?
Yes. The Empire was broken, fragmented into petty squabbles and competing factions. But that was always a part of my plan. Control these factions, unite them under a singular vision. It took time, but I was methodical. I began by consolidating power within the military and removing those who would not align with the goals of the new empire. Some, like were dealt with swiftly. Others were brought into the fold through careful diplomacy. The key was understanding each individual's motivations and using that to guide them toward the Empire's greater purpose.
So in a sense, you weren't just rebuilding the Empire, you were reprogramming it. Like a slicer at a data console, you had to be methodical, calculating, even ruthless, but you had a vision for the long term. I suppose it makes sense, given your track record, that your return wasn't just about taking back power for power's sake, but about positioning the Empire for what was coming next.
Absolutely. Power for its own sake is fleeting and is always vulnerable to corruption. My goal was not merely to restore the Empire, but to prepare it for the trials ahead. We faced not just the threat of external enemies, but decay from within. I needed a strong, focused fleet, one that could withstand the pressures of an unpredictable galaxy and protect the legacy of the Empire.
And that's what makes you so different, Grand Admiral. You didn't just think about power or control in the moment. You thought about the bigger picture, the survival of the galaxy itself. The Empire was more than just your duty. It was a tool for ensuring that order prevailed, even when others couldn't see the looming threats. And though many had their misgivings, Imperial Command couldn't deny your ability to see the long game.
Foresight is the key to everything. To discern the patterns, to understand the probable trajectory of events. These are the hallmarks of an effective strategist. In the end, it was not just about winning battles. It was about preparing the Empire for the future and ensuring that it could survive the chaos to come.
All right, so at this stage, you've amassed your 6 Star Destroyers, a handful of cruisers, and essentially what's left of the Empire's resources. Hardly overwhelming in terms of military might. You reorganized the fleet, rallied the Moffs, and started training up your personnel, but you were dealing with conscripts and rookies. How did you manage to make something out of so little?
It was about understanding the potential in every individual. I focused on ensuring that those who were conscripted or inexperienced received proper training. I used a mix of older, experienced officers and younger recruits, pairing them together so that knowledge was passed on. In a matter of months, the personnel under my command were operating at a level far beyond their initial capabilities. Even unconventional maneuvers like hyperspace microjumps became second nature. It wasn't about the quantity of ships. It was about the quality of those who commanded them.
You almost sound like more of an instructor than a strategist.
In a sense, yes. An effective leader must understand the strengths and weaknesses of his people, not just his enemies. The greatest asset of any military is its personnel, and I made sure to focus on their development. Not only did I revitalize the Imperial Army, but I also ensured that the ships under my command were crewed with individuals capable of working in harmony, executing high-level tactics with precision.
And speaking of the Empire's industrial capabilities, you didn't just rely on your fleet. You began producing new weapons and ships, right? I've heard you introduce the Scimitar assault bomber. That was a bold move when your production lines weren't close to running at full capacity.
The Empire's shipyards were indeed reduced, but that did not mean we'd lost the ability to innovate. The Scimitar was a product of necessity, designed to fill a gap in our capabilities. Given the limited resources available, it was obvious that the key was efficiency, maximizing the output of our remaining factories. I also prioritized the construction of ships that could make a real difference in the coming campaigns. Every asset, every ship had to serve a specific purpose. I couldn't afford any waste.
I have to say, what really interests me is how you started dealing with the Moffs. I mean, you were essentially taking on a divided empire with warlords more focused on squabbling with each other than actually working together. How did you manage that?
The Moffs were predictable in their own way. They were driven by self-preservation and the desire to maintain their territories. I used that to my advantage. I offered them the security they craved, while at the same time I ensured that their power did not overshadow the needs of the larger empire. I reorganized the fleet, shifted resources, and demonstrated a level of determination that even the most stubborn of them could not ignore. By showing them that the Empire's survival depended on unity, I was able to rally them, even if their loyalty was often tenuous at best.
So you essentially played the Moffs against each other, showed them the bigger picture, and turned them into reluctant allies in your campaign.
In essence, yes. It was a delicate balance. I made sure that their territories were adequately defended, reinforcing Orinda as the seat of imperial power, while I kept control over the fleet. They may have been fragmented, but they understood that their survival depended on maintaining some semblance of order within the Empire.
And speaking of the Empire's industrial capabilities, you didn't just rely on your fleet. You began producing new weapons and ships, right? I've heard you introduce the Scimitar assault bomber. That was a bold move when your production lines weren't close to running at full capacity.
The Delta source was none other than the Chihala trees that were part of Palpatine's spy network, pieces of his web of intelligence. Communication tubes buried in the taproot of trees decorating the Imperial Palace and other sensitive locations co-opted by the New Republic provided an invaluable means of intercepting crucial information. This insight into their strategies and movements gave me an edge that was instrumental in the early stages of my campaign.
So you're not just relying on brute force or conventional tactics, you're playing the intelligence game too. You've got the military might, you've got trained personnel, and you've got eyes and ears inside the New Republic. It seems like you were always several steps ahead.
That is the nature of strategy. Anticipating your enemy's moves before they even know they've made them. The key to victory is not only defeating your enemies, but understanding them completely.
So now you're executing this grand strategy to wipe out the New Republic. Still, you were outnumbered, and all the strategy in the galaxy would have a difficult time surpassing overwhelming force. Now, you managed to get your hands on 20,000 Sparty cloning cylinders, but resorting to this technology had its faults even for the Kaminoans of the Clone Wars, and they were considered masters in their craft. Why did you pursue this, knowing the potential risks of cloning?
Obviously, the Empire had already used them in the past. But the flaw in most cloning techniques was the instability caused by the Force's influence. A clone grown too quickly could suffer from what is known as clone madness, a dangerous mental instability. However, I discovered a solution: the Ysalamiri. These creatures could block the effects of the Force, creating an environment where a clone could be stabilized. With the Sparty cylinders, I could produce personnel rapidly, bypassing the usual limitations and ensuring I had an army capable of executing my strategy, without the typical delays associated with recruitment and training.
Ysalamiri, those are essentially a species of lizard imbued with some ability to dampen the Force, right? So you're telling me that by using these creatures, you could create an army of clones without the typical Force-related side effects. But the only remaining Sparty technology had been stashed away in some unknown hideout in the galaxy. How long did it take you to find?
It took longer than I had hoped. I wasn't merely searching for weapons or supplies. I needed to locate the Emperor's storehouse, where critical technologies that he'd amassed during his time in power were hidden. This was a location known to very few, and the security around it was formidable. But, as with any grand strategy, patience is a necessity. The delay allowed me to conduct other operations, surveying nearby systems and executing small tactical strikes to test the resolve of the New Republic while I continued my search.
And these hit and fade attacks across Imperial space, taking down targets like Draukizi and Payon Nud. You were sending a message, weren't you? Because it was then that rumors began to circulate through the New Republic about a new leader rising in the Empire. They didn't know it was you at first, though?
Indeed, my operations were designed to be elusive. I wanted to ensure that the New Republic couldn't trace the resurgence of Imperial power back to me immediately. The attacks were a mix of precision strikes and subtle positioning, never revealing too much.
You didn't want to give them a chance to react too early? Very smart. But at the same time, you were impressing the Moffs, showing them that you had the capability to rule, right? Even the Dasta family started backing you.
The Moffs and other Imperial leaders needed to see success. Words and promises are of little value. Actions speak louder. My triumph in the field and the victories against the New Republic's forces earned me both the respect and support of influential figures within the Empire. The Dasta family, recognizing my ability to deliver results, aligned themselves with my cause. Their backing was an important development. It solidified my position within the Imperial hierarchy.
So when they gave you command of the Imperial military, they thought you would be easy to control, didn't they? Being an outcast from your own world and not part of the old Imperial politics, but they couldn't have been more wrong.
The Imperial Ruling Council underestimated me, as did the Moffs. They believed that my status as an alien and outsider would make me malleable, a puppet leader. They did not fully understand my intentions or my capabilities. Once I had command, I knew how to appeal to the Emperor's old supporters while also cutting out those who were weak or indecisive to consolidate my power. I was not interested in merely preserving the status quo. I had a vision for the Empire's future, one that would secure its survival and dominance from the ashes of its failures.
Let's return to locating the Emperor's storehouses. You eventually uncovered one of them at Mount Tantus on Wayland, but your successful early strikes had already begun to show the cracks in the New Republic enough that retaliation was in order. They managed to track your movements and at one point confronted your forces with 4 assault frigates, outgunned and outmanned. Most commanders would call for backup, maybe retreat. Instead, you stood your ground. Why?
It was a calculated decision. To retreat or call for reinforcements would have been to reveal the true extent of my forces. The New Republic, at that point, was still unaware of the strength I had at my disposal. It was critical that I maintained the element of surprise. I chose instead to send out 3 sentry ships, allowing the enemy to adjust their tactics. The response pattern revealed that the New Republic commander was an Elom, an important detail that provided me with everything I needed. I then executed a Marg Sabel maneuver. It's a tactic designed to overwhelm the enemy with unexpected movements, exploiting the Elom's inability to adapt. The result was a swift victory.
I see. So you didn't just fight the enemy, you studied them, put yourself in the mind of their commander, and used that knowledge to crush them. And then you set a course for Wayland, but not before stopping at Merkur to harvest Ysalamiri, the creatures you needed for your cloning.
Not merely for the cloning. An important distinction here, Tucker. Ysalamiri are crucial for neutralizing all effects of the Force. I had long suspected that the Emperor used battle meditation, a rumored power of both Sith and Jedi alike, to coordinate the Imperial fleet. His influence was a significant part of what made the Empire so formidable in battle. After Palpatine's death at Endor, that control was lost, and the shock defeat was inevitable. I needed a way to protect my forces from any Jedi or Force-sensitive interference, and Ysalamiri were the perfect solution. Their ability to create a Force-free barrier would keep any Force wielders at a disadvantage, allowing me to operate freely. Although Luke Skywalker had already been identified as a known Jedi threat allied with the New Republic, there were other considerations.
You're referring to Joruus C'baoth?
He was a complication. This C'baoth was a clone of the Jedi Master who had been aboard the outbound flight when I destroyed it. I had suspected that Palpatine had left a Guardian in place to protect the storehouses, likely a Dark Jedi. What I didn't expect was to find C'baoth driven insane by the cloning process. His instability was apparent the moment we encountered him. His erratic behavior and attack on my forces showed that he was a dangerous liability. However, I saw that his connection to the Force and his past as a Jedi made him a potential asset.
You wanted to recruit him?
Despite his madness, C'baoth was still powerful and capable. He had a strong desire to exert control, and that desire could be channeled to our benefit. I proposed an arrangement. In exchange for allying with me, the Empire would capture Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa Solo, and her unborn twins, whom he desired as apprentices. The offer appealed to his ambition and his need for power. It was a pragmatic decision, one that could enhance the coordination of our forces and add a new, albeit unpredictable, ally to our ranks.
So it seems as though everything is going according to plan, but do you ever have any doubts about this Dark Jedi, about your use of clones, anything?
Doubt is a luxury I cannot afford. Every decision I make is calculated, every move considered for its strategic merit. I understand the risks of working with unstable elements like C'baoth, but the larger goal, the restoration of the Empire, the defeat of the New Republic, requires bold actions. The future of the galaxy is at stake, and I will do whatever is necessary to secure it.
Fair enough. But there was another source of instability, wasn't there? You began experimenting with new types of clones, enhanced warriors. You tried mixing your own tactical knowledge into the cloning process. What happened there?
My goal was to create soldiers who could not only execute tactics with precision, but also possess the long-term vision to adapt to unforeseen challenges. The template I selected was Grodin Tierce, a former royal guard. His combat proficiency was beyond question. However, despite my adjustments to the flash-pumping matrix, the clone we created was little more than an excellent tactical executor, lacking the broader strategic vision I had hoped for. The failure of that project taught me a valuable lesson. Even with the right genetic template, some aspects of leadership and foresight cannot be replicated in a clone.
And although this did not prove successful, you went even further. You started research into Force-sensitive clones. Now, I've got to ask, why clone Force users? The Jedi and Sith were such a huge part, at least in your words, of the endless cycles of conflict the Republic and even the Empire had faced. What was your endgame here?
The reason for cloning Force-sensitive individuals was simple: power. The Force has always been a central element in galactic politics and warfare. I could not afford to ignore its influence. Palpatine had carefully safeguarded the DNA of powerful Force users, and I saw an opportunity to harness that potential. I believed it wholly possible to utilize their unique abilities in a way that would bolster the Empire's military strength without repeating the chaotic nature of previous Force-sensitive power struggles. Unfortunately, that belief made the outcome all the more disappointing. The rebellion of the Force-sensitive clones was an unforeseen outcome. We had raised them in secret, isolated on a frozen moon, under strict Imperial control. But, as with all things, the desire for autonomy is difficult to suppress. The clones, despite their potential, grew restless and eventually rebelled against their creators. This situation highlighted an important truth. One can impose control and discipline, but cannot completely erase the inherent desire for freedom and self-determination, even for clones.
And how did you handle this setback? Did you simply cut your losses, or did you try again?
I have always believed in learning from failures, not abandoning them. Each experiment, whether it succeeds or fails, contributes to a larger understanding of what works and what does not. It is essential to adapt and evolve. While I would not attempt to create more Force-sensitive clones in the same manner, the overall goal of strengthening the Empire's military remained unchanged.
All right, Grand Admiral, let's examine how pursuing some of your other goals played out. Despite your promise to deliver Leia Organa Solo and Luke Skywalker to Sabayoth, the kidnapping attempts of your Nogri commandos ended in frustration and constant setbacks. What was your plan after that first failure on Bimasari?
The Nogri, while highly skilled, were not fully prepared for the abilities of Skywalker. Their failure was disappointing, but not disastrous. I ordered a second team to continue preparations, but I was aware that the situation with Sabayoth was becoming increasingly urgent. Sabayoth's impatience is something I expected, but it presented a challenge. I could not afford to lose the leverage he provided in our operations. My decision then was to start a rumor, to claim that Sabayoth had been spotted on Jomark in a calculated move to lure Skywalker into a trap. It is, on occasion, necessary to adjust one's plans to the circumstances at hand and find an alternative path to achieve the same objective.
Interesting. Baiting Skywalker was certainly a risk, but of course you were also planning an attack on Sluice Vaughn, hitting multiple systems in the sector with coordinated attacks. What exactly were you hoping to accomplish by doing this?
The primary objective at Sluice Vaughn was not to decimate the New Republic fleet, but to capture valuable resources, specifically ships. Our cloning efforts had outpaced ship production, which left us at a disadvantage. The idea was to spread the enemy's forces across multiple fronts, forcing them to commit reinforcements to defend Sluis Van. I led a three-prong hit-and-fade attack on Bepfash as a demonstration of our capabilities. Enough damage to frighten the enemy and waste their resources without committing a full-scale assault. It was a methodical application of pressure, with each operation feeding into the next.
And that's when you sent your Nogri to capture Leia a second time. But once again, an unsuccessful attempt. What was your reaction to this?
It was frustrating to see the Nogri fail again, especially when the stakes were so high. However, I did not lose faith in their capabilities. The Nogri are loyal, resourceful, and formidable. The issue was not in their skill, but in the constant need to adjust tactics when dealing with the unpredictable variables that Leia Organa Solo presented. It was a matter of recalibrating the approach to ensure success in the next attempt.
Those stakes, of course, coming from Sabayoth, who I want to circle back to. You have him involved in your attacks with battle meditation, and you're keeping him engaged with Skywalker. But his motivations were becoming ever murkier. Was he getting too unpredictable for you?
Sabayoth's unpredictability was indeed a concern, but I could not afford to disregard his potential. The battle meditation you mentioned was invaluable, allowing us to coordinate multiple attacks across the sector with precision. Granted, his presence was not without risks, and I was aware of the necessity to keep him in check. While Sabayoth was stationed at Jomark, I had already set the plan in motion to intercept Skywalker on his way there. I suspected that Leia would not be far behind, possibly seeking refuge with the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, and the probes I had employed to track his movements confirmed this. It was a calculated risk, ensuring that I could capture both Skywalker and Organa Solo should the opportunity present itself.
So it's all about precision. It's obvious you're playing multiple angles here, but at what point does it become too much? I mean, with so many plans and contingencies in motion, did you ever feel like the whole operation could collapse if every portion did not go as planned?
In warfare, no plan is ever perfect. There are always variables, unexpected outcomes, and unknowns that must be accounted for. The key to success lies in adaptability. I trust in the data, in the precision of the operations, and in the loyalty of my subordinates. If one piece falters, there was always a contingency in place to minimize the impact and recalibrate the strategy. I am not afraid of failure. I learn from it and use it to refine my approach.
You mentioned faltering pieces. What about the incident that happened later when you moved to trap Skywalker coming out of a hyperspace jump? He managed to escape your clutches, albeit with a failing hyperdrive, and even dealt some minor damage to the Chimera. What was your reaction to that? Were you impressed or just annoyed?
It was an unexpected maneuver. Skywalker's quick thinking demonstrated a certain level of resourcefulness, to be sure. However, that does not excuse the failure of my crew to anticipate such an action. The ensign in question, Chris Piet-Erson, failed to adapt to the situation. Then he refused to admit his mistake. In a military environment, that is unacceptable. I had him executed. Such behavior cannot be tolerated. A leader must be prepared for failure, but must also ensure that it is not repeated.
Understandable. So you had Skywalker on the run with a damaged hyperdrive, and you even offered a bounty for his capture, but then shortly thereafter, you found yourself meeting with the smuggler Talon Card, and you started piecing together that he might be hiding something. What tipped you off that Card wasn't as straightforward as he appeared?
Card is a shrewd operator, and I was aware that his interests would not necessarily align with mine. During our meeting, he seemed surprised that the Empire was still pursuing Skywalker. That caught my attention. He was playing a game, and I could sense it. The lack of communication from his pursuing blast boat crew strongly indicated the fact that Card had already found the Jedi, yet hesitated to turn him over. He was not as neutral as he presented himself to be. I followed my instincts and had my forces dispatched to Hilliard City, but even then I knew that Card was playing his own hand. I simply had to ensure that my own plans did not fall prey to his manipulation.
Of course, I mean, you wouldn't want your plans interrupted so close to the attack on the Sluice Van shipyards. You had orchestrated a complex scheme employing cloaking devices and mining vessels you'd stolen from Lando Calrissian, who just so happened to arrive with the Millennium Falcon to sabotage your schemes. What was going through your mind when that happened?
Lando Calrissian is a wild card, one that I had not fully anticipated in my calculations. His intervention was unexpected, but I am not one to dwell on mistakes. The plan, while sound, had a vulnerability, one that Calrissian exploited. The mole miners were supposed to silently disable the captured ships, but with his remote access codes, they were rendered useless. It was an unfortunate failure, but it was not the end. The New Republic managed to foil my plan, yes, but in the end, I still captured a ship and left many of theirs disabled. Such is the nature of warfare.
So not a complete loss, and you didn't waste any time with a backup plan. You authorized Pelion to get ships from the underworld, offering a bounty above market value. That's an unorthodox strategy, leveraging the criminal element to build your fleet. Did you have any concerns that bringing in ships this way would backfire?
The defeat at Sluice Van was unfortunate, but the New Republic was still struggling with the damage sustained to their fleet. The need for ships was urgent. Bounties above market value provided an incentive for quick results, and it worked. These ships, while not the largest, would be useful in our larger strategy. They gave us flexibility and bolstered our fleet without attracting unnecessary attention. I had no concerns. In fact, I anticipated such methods would pay off.
It seems as though they did, although your gambit with Talon Card, not so much. First, he ultimately helped Skywalker escape and then dodged a trap you'd set for him with the help of his second-in-command, Mara Jade. Is it fair to say this time that they were one step ahead of you?
Card is a fascinating opponent. He understands the balance of power, but his constant manipulation complicates matters. I adapted, of course. A bounty for Card was issued as a measure to keep pressure on him. He has his own agenda, but ultimately, he will make a mistake. All I need is patience.
There were other players you wanted to remove from the game, were there not? For instance, your targeting of Admiral Akbar. You had Imperial Intelligence plant false evidence in his account, making him appear to be involved in a conspiracy. This caused some serious division in the New Republic. Was this just about Akbar for you, or was this part of a larger strategy to weaken the entire Republic?
It was both. Akbar is a competent strategist, but the New Republic's leadership was fragile. I saw an opportunity to create doubt within their ranks. The false evidence on Akbar wasn't conclusive enough to accuse him outright, but it sowed the seeds of mistrust. Borsk failure seized on that uncertainty, and that only deepened the divisions within the New Republic. While Akbar was distracted, I knew it would take time for them to recover from the internal fracture. By creating a vacuum, I ensured that the New Republic would be weaker in its response to our next moves.
It's good that you did, as you had other matters to attend to when Leia escaped the Nogri's grasp once more on Kashyyyk. That had to be frustrating. What did you make of Kabrak's failure to arrive sooner, and when you confronted him, did you suspect something was off?
When Kabrak returned after a month, I suspected there was more to the situation than simple failure. His refusal to discuss the matter in detail with his clan immediately raised questions. When I ordered a search of his shuttle and found Wookiee hairs, I knew something was amiss. He had undoubtedly been captured and had to be treated as compromised.
That wasn't the only thing that might have been compromised, was it? You realized around this time that the New Republic might be seeking the Emperor's storehouses. What did you do then?
I was concerned, but not surprised. The New Republic's pursuit of the Emperor's legacy was a matter I had anticipated. The appearance of the Millennium Falcon at Endor was not coincidental. I knew they were searching for something important. The Emperor's storehouse was a critical point of interest. I had to act quickly, and that meant cutting short my visit to Honoghr. The situation at Endor required my attention, as it presented both an opportunity and a potential threat. I needed to secure our position before the New Republic could learn more.
So you arrived at Endor only to find the Millennium Falcon abandoned as though someone left in a hurry, but you still had the ship brought aboard for closer examination. Why go to the effort?
It was a necessary precaution. The Millennium Falcon is a symbol of resistance, and such a ship, even when deserted, cannot be overlooked. While it was evident that Leia and Chewbacca had already moved on, I was not about to ignore the possibility of valuable intelligence hidden within the ship. Every detail counts.
And then, out of nowhere, Mara Jade arrived, captured in the Abrogado system, and she demanded to speak to you. Now, you briefly mentioned her before. What was this interaction like?
When Mara Jade reached out, I understood immediately that her presence was not random. She is not a person to be ignored. Her offer, a deal for the location of the Katana fleet in exchange for the cancellation of Card's bounty, was an interesting one. The Katana fleet, a long-lost collection of dreadnoughts, was invaluable. I recognized her offer for what it was, an opportunity. Mara Jade has always been unpredictable, but she also understands the gravity of the situation. Her proposal was rational, and I accepted it, on the condition that she would deliver.
So you struck a deal with her, but never fully trusting, placed a homing beacon on her ship and pursued her back to Card's hideout. Jade attacked you once you'd captured the smuggler. Was this just blind fury, or her realizing she was a pawn in your game?
Mara Jade is not someone easily deceived, but her emotions clouded her judgment in that moment. Yet, even after this, I knew I could rely on her to make a rational decision. She could either continue to fight or accept new terms. My offer was a path for her to reclaim some sense of order in a situation that was rapidly spinning out of control, a chance to return to service for the Empire.
It must have infuriated you when you discovered she had gone off to find Skywalker and enlisted his help.
Her decision to find Skywalker was troublesome. Jade had always been tied to her past, and the idea of an alliance with a Jedi, someone who represented the Empire's antithesis, was a logical course of action considering her newfound assessment of the Empire. However, I anticipated this move and was prepared for it. I knew that Skywalker, with his idealistic approach, would be drawn to her. Her belief that the Empire she once served is dead is merely a reflection of her misguided views on what my Empire truly means for the galaxy.
But then your plan unraveled. Jade and Skywalker stole an Imperial shuttle, boarded the Chimera, and were able to flee with Card. How were they able to pull this off?
It was a failure of execution, not of foresight. The computer shutdown we enacted was necessary, but it inadvertently allowed them to operate with more freedom than I had anticipated. Skywalker's use of the Force to locate Card was likely, but even with the additional precautions I put in place, such as the Ysalamiri and extra troops, their escape was better coordinated than expected. They bypassed the main hangar bays, which was a critical oversight on our part. The Millennium Falcon's escape was regrettable, and I had underestimated their resourcefulness. But I will not make the same mistake again.
Well said, Grand Admiral. Now let's get back to the Katana fleet. Skywalker's involvement in Card's escape made it all but certain that Card would reveal the fleet's location to him. He was one of only a handful in the galaxy who knew where it was. But you tracked down another, the smuggler, who was with Card when they made the blind hyperspace jump that unexpectedly led them to the Katana fleet's secret location. You found he'd recovered several of the dreadnoughts already and sold them to the New Republic general, Bel Iblis. But with the proper application of force, you obtained the Katana fleet's coordinates and were able to acquire 180 of the 200 ships before New Republic forces had even arrived. How were you able to do this?
Skywalker's interference could not circumvent the reality that the New Republic is often slow to act, burdened by internal power struggles, such as Failures' political dealings. I foresaw that the New Republic's efforts would be disjointed, while I had already taken steps to secure the fleet. Niles Ferrier's efforts and the smugglers' eventual cooperation were merely the final steps in a plan I had already set in motion.
But Sabaoth added complications, didn't he? While you were securing the fleet's last few ships, the Dark Jedi arrived with a Lancer-class frigate and used the Force to hijack your ship. At this point, do you see him becoming a serious problem?
Sabaoth's actions are an unfortunate yet predictable consequence of his nature. It is obvious he believes his Force abilities confer upon him the right to dominate all those who could fall under his influence. When he used his powers to take control of the Chimera's navigator, it was a blatant show of disrespect. I had made it clear that his presence could be tolerated, but only within the boundaries of my command. Attempting to coerce my compliance was a mistake. His arrogance not only delayed our mission, but it also resulted in the loss of the peremptory, an outcome I will not forget. Sabaoth's actions have caused irreparable damage, and while I still see value in his abilities, his thirst for power cannot be ignored.
Is it fair to say that Sabaoth at this point is too dangerous? Would he try to declare himself emperor?
Such a declaration would be indicative of his weakness, not strength. Any desire he harbors to rule the Empire is based not on strategy or intellect, but on sheer arrogance. His increasing disobedience, like his failure to follow orders at Tarnab, has become a liability. I've tolerated his eccentricities because his power is useful, but his reliability as an ally is waning. The Ysalamiri prevent him from exerting full control, but the Force is not his only tool. His insubordination leaves me with little choice but to consider whether he can still be of use, or if his ambition has outgrown his place in the Empire. A tool is only as valuable as the hand that wields it.
And all this is happening while your forces are running raids on planets like Nukov, Sarka, and Korphai. At any point, do you start thinking maybe this is too much at once? Or is this the kind of pressure you thrive under?
The galaxy is a constant state of flux, Tucker. The Empire must be both resilient and adaptable to survive. If anything, the pressure provides clarity. It forces decisions to be made, moves to be calculated. The raids were not distractions, but rather necessary actions to destabilize the New Republic further. I have always found that the greater the difficulty, the more refined the strategy becomes. The challenge sharpens the focus of my purpose. Victory is not achieved through the absence of conflict, but through the ability to navigate and control it.
And you're not without a contingency plan should the conflict grow out of control. You have a clone of yourself stashed away in a secured facility waiting to take your place in the event of your demise. Just how far does your foresight go?
The galaxy is unpredictable, Tucker. While I remain confident in my strategy and capabilities, it is prudent to plan for all possibilities, even those that seem unlikely. A single clone, unaltered, to serve as my replacement should I fall, that was a necessary measure. The cloning cylinder, hidden on Nirawan, is equipped with everything the clone would need to continue my work. I ensured that it would be provided continuous intel on galactic events and remain isolated, protected by security measures in case of any external threats. Ysalamiri and Cortosis droids are but a few of the precautions against any Force wielders who might attempt to sabotage the clone's growth. My officers have standing orders should reports of my death arise. They are to continue operations, awaiting my return.
Interesting. I want to follow up on the future of the Empire in a moment, but let's return to your campaign briefly, particularly your subterfuge at Ukiyo. With the New Republic forces drawn away for minor conflicts, you were able to stage your armada with dreadnoughts outside Wukio's planetary shields and several cloaked dreadnoughts positioned on the inside before their activation. You then created the illusion of a super weapon able to penetrate the shield and force the system into surrender. Why adopt such an approach now?
The success at Wukio was a demonstration of the power of perception. The shield protected the planet from direct attack, so I needed to find another way to breach it, and manipulated their understanding of the situation. Fear is a powerful tool, Tucker. When the enemy believe they are facing something they cannot counter, surrender becomes their only viable option. It's not enough to simply defeat your enemy in battle. One must also control how they perceive their defeat. The psychological aspect of warfare is often overlooked, but it is as vital as any tactical maneuver. Wukio's surrender was just as much a product of the mental disarray I sowed within the New Republic as it was strategy.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? You were attacking over 20 systems, all while Sabaoth was pushing for a full-scale assault on Coruscant. And suddenly, he demands to go off to Mount Tantus, and you acquiesce, continuing to bide your time. What exactly were you waiting for?
The capital is the heart of the New Republic, Tucker. Taking Coruscant would be a significant victory, but only if the timing was right. Striking too early risked overextending ourselves, leaving the Republic with the chance to regroup. I recognized the potential of Sabaoth's growing arrogance and his desire for power, and I knew that he would push for a direct assault. But his methods are often rash, driven more by his egocentric view of the Force. For that reason, I chose to allow him to pursue another mission he'd planned, knowing it would ease the situation. My plan for Coruscant was not based on impulse. It had to be when the Republic was most vulnerable, and when I could capitalize on their confusion and desperation.
Would this be the confusion you were sowing with Mara Jade? Around that time, she was on Coruscant trying to clear her name, and your Imperial intelligence team took the opportunity to frame her. But is it worth taking time to undermine the New Republic's credibility when you've been so successful with direct engagements?
Always. The battlefield is not limited to just ships and soldiers. It is a complex web of political maneuvering, information warfare, and psychological influence. Mara Jade's presence on Coruscant was an opportunity not just to attack her directly, but to discredit her in the eyes of the New Republic. By framing her as an Imperial agent, I weakened her standing and removed a potential source of information that could threaten my plans. Political victories often come in the form of subtle manipulation, and every action must serve a greater purpose.
Grand Admiral, what always stands out in your campaigns is your ability to manipulate every angle of a situation. You've got the New Republic investigating your cloning operation at Mount Tantus, and instead of hiding it, you plant clues to lead them straight to Podaris. But just when it looked like none other than Luke Skywalker would fall victim to this ploy, he escapes yet another one of your traps. This is becoming a bit of a pattern, isn't it?
Had I truly intended to capture him, one might say that. His narrow escape only strengthened the New Republic's belief that they had stumbled upon the location of the Empire's clone project. It played perfectly into the larger strategy. I ensured that the New Republic would focus its efforts on what they believed to be the source of our clones, rather than exploring other, more crucial avenues.
With all due respect, it is a bit far-fetched to believe everything was part of the plan. After all, you were dealing with shortages in materials to Bana, Freedium, Camarus, and scrambling to make up for it. Is that when you decided to go after Calrissian's mining operation on Nankalan?
The Republic's pressure on our supply lines was a predictable move. Their goal was to starve the Empire of resources essential for our fleet and shipbuilding efforts. The raid on Nankalan was a carefully planned operation to acquire what was needed without attracting too much attention. The use of shield ships was a precautionary measure to to avoid repeating the mistakes of previous raids. The Empire's strategy must always be adaptable, and every element, every detail, must be accounted for. Success depends on understanding your enemy's moves and staying a step ahead.
But it was proving difficult to stay ahead of Talon Karrde, wasn't it? He was meeting with other smugglers on Trogan, trying to ally them to the New Republic's cause. Oddly enough, it would have failed were it not for, of all things, Imperial intervention. Tell us what happened there.
The attack on Karrde's meeting was a failure of judgment by Lieutenant Raynal Kosk, who was persuaded to act against my orders. I do not tolerate disobedience, especially when it jeopardizes the larger mission. The result of that failed attack was twofold. Not only did it unite the smugglers, but it also caused unnecessary losses among our own personnel. It was a mistake, one that could have been avoided.
But you didn't dwell on failures as you managed to capture Mriss not long after and could finally set your sights on the ultimate prize, Coruscant, the Republic capital. And your approach for this siege was unorthodox, to say the least. Can you tell us a bit about that?
The key to warfare is deception. As I'd already demonstrated at Ukio, the perception of power often achieves more than raw aggression. By carefully deploying cloaked asteroids at critical blockade points, and by allowing a few to be uncovered, I created the illusion of overwhelming force. I staged my forces such that the New Republic believed the planet to be surrounded by thousands of asteroids, each an invisible and lethal threat. This would trap them in place, closing off the former Imperial city to transportation and reinforcements. All manner of support from within and without was cut off in one swift action, and I hadn't fired a single shot. They could not risk lowering their planetary shields, giving us complete strategic domination. It is not always necessary to destroy your enemy outright. Often simply paralyzing them with fear and uncertainty achieves your goal.
All right, let's break this down. Afterwards, the New Republic was scrambling, trying to clear the asteroids since you'd left them trapped in the system, and you suspected they had only one solution in mind, a crystal grav field trap. Now, there are only 3 of those remaining in the galaxy, all located in Imperial space. So for the New Republic, with Akbar and Maydean leading the charge, they decide that Bilbringi is their best bet, but give the illusion that their destination is actually Tangrain instead. But something tells me you're anticipating this?
The misstep the New Republic made was assuming that they could conceal their true target from someone who understands the nature of war. The Republic is trying to lure me into overcommitting forces to Tangrain while leaving Bilbringi exposed. I will not take the bait. Instead, I have been preparing to defend Bilbringi. The Republic has underestimated my ability to read their movements. They will not have the opportunity to do so again. A blow this decisive will finally put an end to the New Republic.
But you've got your own officers like Pelion telling you that Tangrain is the real target. I'll admit, you've been extremely resourceful so far, but even I'm skeptical. What makes you so confident?
Confidence, as you call it, comes from understanding patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of thought. The New Republic's actions, however indirect they might appear, are all driven by predictable motivations. Desperation from the Coruscant siege, a need to disrupt our supply lines, and a desire to reassert their control over the galaxy. They are throwing up distractions, trying to force us to react to a false target. You should realize by now that I do not rely on luck or instinct, Tucker. It is a deliberate analysis of the situation, a close inspection of their history, their tendencies, and their current objectives. In this case, I know that Bilbringi, the heart of our shipbuilding operations, will be the true objective. Pelion, for all his strategic insight, does not possess the same depth of understanding of our enemy's tactics.
So if this is true, then let's discuss their target, the crystal grav field trap. If the New Republic gets their hands on one of these, they can essentially shut down your fleet's ability to travel between systems. And you've got to know that if they succeed in getting one, they could turn the tide of the war. Does that worry you at all, or are you just that confident in your ability to counter it?
Any weapon, no matter how potent, has a counter. A crystal grav field trap is indeed formidable, but it is not invincible. It is a tool that can be used effectively only if the enemy is allowed to operate with impunity. I have contingencies in place, but I must confess they are practically redundant. We have reinforced the space around the shipyards. We will not allow the New Republic to emerge victorious.
In this case, I've got to ask, how do you keep your forces sharp in moments like this? They know the stakes are high. This isn't just another skirmish. How do you ensure that your fleet is ready for anything?
My fleet is prepared, not just through training, but through understanding. Every officer, from the highest admiral to the lowest crew member, understands that our success will come, not from mere firepower, but from coherence, the seamless integration of mind and strategy. In moments like these, I do not rely on fear or intimidation to keep my officers in line. Instead, I ensure they understand their role in the grand plan. They are part of something larger than themselves, and they will succeed because they know their actions are guided by designs greater than any single individual. This unity of purpose, this clarity of vision, keeps them sharp and focused. This is the true strength of my fleet.
Indeed, the fleet operates like no other force in the galaxy. But I've got to ask, isn't there a variable that could throw the entire Enterprise off balance? I'm speaking, of course, about Master C'baoth. In bringing him into your strategy, you've granted him Imperial influence, and in sending him away, you may have handed him something incredibly valuable, access to Luke Skywalker. That's a powerful, volatile combination. Are you not concerned that he might corrupt Skywalker? Take him on as an apprentice?
C'baoth is an unstable element, that much is true. But he is not outside the bounds of my calculations. His obsession with the Skywalker line, his desire to mold them into his own twisted visions of Jedi, was anticipated. He believes he is operating freely. In reality, he has been placed precisely where he is most useful and most vulnerable. Should C'baoth attempt to seize Skywalker, or perhaps even Mara Jade, as apprentices, he will find that his grasp exceeds his reach. The Isalamiri surrounding Mount Tantis are not the only failsafes. Once we have disposed of the New Republic fleet, I have contingencies in place to neutralize him.
Well, some reports, the scattered unconfirmed, suggest the situation at Mount Tantis is unraveling. Force surges, rogue units. There's even talk of Skywalker engaging what seems to be a clone of himself. Is that one of your contingencies?
A clone? That would be C'baoth's doing, not mine. Such a tactic smacks of theatrical desperation. I do not indulge in symbolism. I construct reality. If C'baoth has indeed unleashed some twisted imitation of Skywalker, it only confirms what I have long known, that his vision for power has spiraled out of control, consumed by chaos. And chaos, Tucker, is a poor substitute for strategy. Let C'baoth flail in the dark. Let Skywalker struggle with reflections of himself. These are distractions. Here, at Bilbringi, the fate of this galaxy will be decided. This is where the New Republic will fall. And when they do, there will be no Jedi clones, no deranged dark Jedi, and no rogue smugglers who can reverse what I have set in motion.
So this is it then. The galaxy will be reformed once again into a total galactic empire.
More than reformed, Tucker. Fortified. I have not rebuilt the empire simply to restore a name or banner. I have done so to offer a model, a foundation for those who will one day face the darkness I have glimpsed. When I am gone, others must know how to rule, how to adapt, how to endure the emerging threats from the far outsiders and beyond. Everything I have achieved, the consolidation of the fleet, the reassertion of order is not for my ambition. And though I do not require glory, I believe when others look back on this moment, at the destruction of the New Republic, the galaxy will remember. It was so artistically done. Now then, was there anything else you wanted to ask?
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Grand Admiral.